Jordan and Gretzky, Serena and Ruth. Remembering great ones is easy to do. But what about the no-names who spent their whole lives long-snapping footballs and catching sack flies? They're guys, remember that guy. Remember that guy, remember that guy, remember that guy, remember that guy. They're just gonna remember some guys now.
Impossible theater, the regal excellence of Japan, the overwhelming talent of the United States, and in a one-run game with 2 gone in the 9th inning, the dream matchup. Remember? That Guy, the show where we mine our memories for nuggets of nostalgia about peripheral players past and present. Hello there, folks. I'm one of your hosts, James, and boy, sure does suck that the single most watched baseball game in the history of the sport didn't matter.
It didn't matter one bit. Diaz back with you once again, but we do have a guest that matters a great deal, here to explain some of his controversial comments about the validity of the World Baseball Classic. We're going to take him to task, but first we're going to welcome our very special guest.
That's right. It's me, Keith Olbermann. Oh, God. Please, no. Please, no. Oh, thank God. It's me, Xavier, the very special guest again.
I think that's the worst identity that you have painted Xavier into a corner yet. Keith Olbermann's pretty brutal.
It's such a shame, too, because, I used to like Keith Olbermann, and then I heard Keith Olbermann speak more. And the more I heard him speak, I realized Keith Olbermann is just a fucking dick. I'm astounded by how a person that subscribes to his worldview politically can then be so bafflingly ignorant when it comes to the greatest baseball tournament in the history of baseball.
If you came away from the only bad game in the knockout rounds was US-Cuba. US-Cuba was a bit of a snooze fest, even if Cedric Mullins got a solo shot.
That wasn't very entertaining, especially the fact that Cuba fans weren't even there just to support Cuba. There were so many Cuba fans there to protest Cuba, so it made for an awkward atmosphere too. It wasn't very celebration-y. Like watching even just the Nicaragua games during pool play, the fans were great. They were fun. We didn't have that same atmosphere for that game. One of those very few times that happened, but overall, I mean, it was fantastic.
We won't dwell on this too long, but I do want to just mention, in Mike Trout's career, he's got 6,174 plate appearances, and 24 of them have had 3 swinging strikes in them. That is 0.4%. And Shohei Ohtani has now added 1 more. It won't be counted, anywhere, I think, in Baseball Reference, but it's just incredible. I think best thing to sum it all up, so I will one more time reference Cespedes Barbecue talking this week. We got to see something new and wonderful, and it is insane that anyone doesn't want to celebrate the birth of something new and great.
Right, and I think it's also important, we have a very American-centric view often when we're viewing sports here in America, go figure. But the 2 numbers that jumped out the most to me, during the championship game, 97% of Japanese TVs that were turned on were turned into the game. So if you are a person in Japan who had your TV on, and there's 100 of you in a room, there's only 3 of you that weren't watching this game, which is insane.
If a member of that 2.6%, I'm so curious as to what the fuck it was that you were watching. Please let us know.
Could have been a big night for anime. Who knows? We all love anime here. We all love baseball here. We also love baseball in Puerto Rico, where 60% of all people watched the elimination game against the Dominican Republic to determine the final spot in the quarterfinals. Anybody who is saying, well, this tournament isn't big, it's one of those things where it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy to say that. You think it's lame, so therefore it's lame to you. If you would just take this baseball at face value and appreciate it and buy in to the same extent that the players did, because that's the other big indicator to me. The players gave so much of a shit. If they were out there giving NBA All-Star game levels of effort, I could get why you would then say, hey, this is not a serious tournament. Why does anybody care about it? Every single person that played in that said, this means as much, if not more, than a World Series. So if you think you know more than the actual players that are on the field, you're wrong. You need to stop having opinions about sports because they're not good ones, and we don't want to hear them.
The good news is there are things we want to hear. Diaz, I would love to hear, other than the World Baseball Classic, what it is currently that is making memories for you.
Well, I alluded to this a little bit in our behind the scenes chat. The other night, I was watching a thrilling overtime game in a world championship. At first, I thought it was floor hockey, but I very quickly learned the appropriate terminology is floorball. I was watching the Women's World Floorball Championship between Sweden and Finland. This was a thriller. Sweden entered overtime, having to kill off a power play. By my view, all the rules seem very, very similar to just regular ice hockey. I don't think there's offsides, which is a fun little twist, but very similar sport. Sweden enters on the power play, on the penalty kill, having to kill a power play. Kill it off. They get the winner. They won their 8th straight world championship in floorball. That was impressive enough to me right off the jump. Oh, I should also mention, this game happened in 2021. It was on beIN Sports. I saw it was on. It said live. I quickly saw the 2021, but then I thought, hey, I have no idea how this game ends. It might as well be live.
It might as well be live to you, yeah.
It might as well be live. So I stayed tuned in. It was a thriller. Emily Wibron with the winner in overtime. If I remember correctly from the broadcast, she had just very recently returned from injury. So we love a dramatic game-winning goal. Here's the thing. So Sweden has been very dominant in women's floorball. They won their 8th consecutive world championship.
If I may ask for one moment, we're a little further down the road now. Have they won a 9th and 10th?
They have not yet. This is where we're setting the floor for the 2023 Women's World Floorball Championship. Will be competed in Singapore towards the end of November, start of December this year. We're hoping to maybe see some parity finally emerge in this sport, because not only has Sweden won 8 consecutive finals, there are only 3 teams in the history of this championship, which has been competed every other year since 1997. There are only 3 teams to have even appeared in a final. That being Sweden, Finland, and their opponent in that game, and Switzerland. These are the only 3 teams that have ever appeared in a championship. If we go to the 3rd place game, there's only 2 other teams that have even appeared in that game, the Czech Republic and Norway.
Okay, like how many people are starting out in these tournaments to begin with if only 5 have made it to the top 2 rounds?
It's a 16-team tournament.
That's still pretty bad. That's pretty bad, the rest of you.
My understanding of the format is it's kind of similar to the FIFA World Cup, where you start with group stage, your round robin, and then from there they go quarterfinals, semifinals, finals. But yes, so every other year since 1997, so you can do that math real quick. I believe that's 14 or 15 championships that have been played, and there's only been 5 teams that have competed for either the gold or the bronze. So stunning levels of dominance at the top. You know, people are worried about top heaviness in college football and women's college basketball. I think we need to be more focused on breaking up these dynasties in international women's floorball. But in all seriousness, 2023, I'm going to be locked in. We're going to see if maybe we can have some fun content going for you all around those championships. Stay tuned. Come back around November. But for my 31st birthday at the end of November, I personally can't wait for my favorite gift, which is going to be international women's floorball.
It's what every kid has on their list. Xavier, real quick, now that you've purged all that Keith Olbermann out of your system and have regained control of your body, I'm curious, is there anything that's making memories for you?
Yeah, I got a couple things. First off, probably have to pile on the bandwagon of trashing Seth Davis today. As much as I would love her, Dawn Staley is not coming to Temple. I think everybody has to accept that fact. It's a massive downgrade, both on a sporting level and a financial level. She can do whatever she wants at South Carolina and win titles every year. And she also gets paid more than $3 million. Temple paid McKee about $1 million. We're in a conference with no geographic rivals, that's losing some of its best teams, and has no NIL money. I've actually learned this today. Temple pays their players $5,000 for basketball. Temple has 6 players in the transfer portal right now. According to some reports, 4 of them are going to get 6-figure deals or more from teams that they are considering transferring to. Even if things were great at Temple, it's really hard to keep a player if they're going to get paid $100,000 more to play somewhere else. Unless Temple somehow has some sort of massive booster waiting in the wings ready to throw $1 billion at everybody and Dawn Staley takes pity on us, she's not coming to Temple. Unfortunately, it seems like Arthur Johnson, like a lot of Temple leadership, who are all very, very bad right now and could all be fired within the next month or so, sounds like he's not interested in looking at people with local ties either. He's just sitting there and waiting as coaches get hired by other schools, and despite having a head start on the coaching carousel, all we've heard is that Temple isn't interested in up-and-coming coaches. The only person that we know that they've said has had any interest is Sam Cassell, which was quickly then shot down and makes no sense whatsoever. There's rumors that he's waiting to hope that Rodney Terry doesn't get the Texas job. I mean, that's a terrible decision for multiple reasons. One, sure, Rodney Terry has done good with a great team that, you know, was already a preseason high pick, but he didn't recruit those players. And his only head coaching experience was at UTEP, where he was sub 500 and has no known ties to the Northeast or even the East Coast. I'm not very excited about that. So I'm kind of worried about the direction of Temple basketball at this moment.
This has occurred to me while I've been talking, and I will preface by saying this is an incredibly dark thought, but I am thinking of a domino meme. And the tiny domino is Bill Cosby is completely unable to keep himself from raping dozens of people. And the biggest domino is the Temple University Athletics Department is completely bankrupt all the time.
Financially bankrupt, at least not morally bankrupt. Which one matters more for wins and losses? I think the history of sports has unfortunately proven which one is more detrimental. Nonetheless, the biggest thing to me is with the Terry potential to be hired, Xavier. He's going to have better job offers is the other thing. That Penn State is a better job right now than Temple for basketball, which is incredible. If you would have said that to me 20 years ago, it would have seemed as outlandish to me as saying that Temple football is now a better job than Penn State football.
11-year-old Diaz is just like, that's the stupidest fucking take I've ever heard. You don't know anything about ball.
You know zero about ball. But like, I mean, truly, like, that's where those programs were in relation to each other. Temple basketball, it's still, you hear it all the time, the 5th most wins in college basketball history. This is a legendary program that is being gutted. It's in a place that it shouldn't be. I don't know what the answers are. This is why I don't work as an athletic director or an administration or in all these things. But all I know is I'm an alum and I'm upset and we need to fix it. Please fix my basketball team. I like when my basketball team is good. I want them to be good again.
Mike Jensen of the Inquirer just tweeted out, hearing the same names for Temple from several directions. Do either of you want to guess who the 3 names that he puts at the top are?
I mean, I like that Colgate guy.
He's not on there. There has been reporting that Temple has no interest in him. The stupid reason that's being bandied about is that he's, quote, never developed a pro. So he doesn't want him despite
taking
Colgate.
The Owls are such a pro factory right now.
Hold on.
So the 3 on this list are Carl Hobbs, who has been associate head coach at Rutgers for the past 7 years. And before that, his only head coaching experience was 10 years at George Washington from 2001 to 2011. Then Pat Chambers, who, lest we forget, was forced out of Penn State with some bullying allegations. Not a bad coach, but there's some baggage there, and only recently coached at Florida Gulf Coast this year, going 17-15 in a very bad Atlantic Sun. And then the last is Adam Fisher, who is the associate head coach at Penn State. So 2 of the 3 are Penn State guys. Temple is trying to raid the Penn State coaching tree for a basketball coach at this point, which is just horrifying to me.
John Chaney is rolling somewhere.
Imagine that Kentucky fires Calipari and Temple's like, hey, you want to come here, the place that you hated for many years, and coach at Temple? And then Chaney actually rises from the grave to kill Calipari. Only other thing I wanted to bring up was great drama in U.S. soccer Twitter right now, as there always is. But this time, positive drama. U.S. soccer has been very bad with strikers. That was our biggest issue at the World Cup. We had no one in form, and our strikers were all bad, and the only goal that a striker scored was Haji Wright's accidental back heel goal against the Netherlands. But there is a kid whose name is Flo Balogun, who plays in League One in France for Rennes on loan from Arsenal. And right now, he is tearing it up. He has 17 goals, which is third, only behind Kylian Mbappe and Jonathan David. Balogun was born in New York, has played for the U.S. under-18s at a tournament in the Czech Republic before, but was raised in England and has played for the English youth side for most of his life. There was a lot of talk about him getting a call-up to the England team, and then they didn't do it. And then England had a forward withdraw through injury, and instead of calling up Balogun, they just decided not to add a replacement player, and instead called Balogun up to the under-21 team. He posted on Instagram and made it pretty clear he wasn't happy about it. So he withdrew with an injury from the England under-21 side, and Americans who are desperate for a striker started tweeting out rumors. And then, oh wait, a day later, he flew to Orlando and was in Orlando at the same time as the U.S. men's training camp for their upcoming Nations League qualifiers. And now it's gone from pipe dream in the course of about a day and a half to many plugged-in U.S. soccer insiders saying, okay, it looks like Balogun might actually commit to the U.S. And it's one of those things where it would be a massive, massive get for the U.S. Definitely becomes the best striker in our player pool. Would almost certainly be the guy going forward for the home World Cup. Even with that, there's a ton of English commentators and even like the English under-21 coach who all kind of downplay it. He's doing all that in France. It's not that big of a deal. Like, we'll see if he comes back to England, and plays in England for a little bit, then he'll get his shot. He just has to wait. Like, they're not taking the threat of him switching to the U.S., or he could also switch to Nigeria if he wanted to through his parents seriously. And I think that their lack of commitment to it might actually push him to the U.S. And a commitment from Balogun would be incredible. And I'm just, like many of U.S. soccer Twitter, I'm crossing my fingers and hoping that happens, because that would make our team innumerably better.
Well, I'm glad you're in a good mood, Xavier, because I'm going to bring us down for a little bit. I'm angry about something. I got some anger building up inside me, and it's anger that we've discussed before. I think this is going to be the thing like butt buzzing that I feel compelled to rant about all year. I want to take us back to something I talked about right before the Super Bowl. Fanatics, the slow-growing invasive species that is choking out the rest of the
led by the guy who was bankrupt as a teenager.
Well, so we're going to talk about the CEO that actually isn't Michael Rubin a little bit later. But a couple things. First off, I've gotten mad about Fanatics since we talked about them around the Super Bowl time, because I found out, I should have included this first time, they bought Topps in January of 22. So they just own the biggest sports card manufacturer in the world wholesale. But they are in the news once again because this week it was announced that after the 10-year contract that the NHL had with Adidas runs out, they will be turning manufacturing over in the 2024-2025 season to Fanatics, which will be the first time that the Fanatics logo is on merchandise that they are making on real athletes. We will point out that although Nike's logo is on the baseball uniforms, those are produced by Majestic, which is owned by Fanatics. So they've already been doing this for a little bit. Fanatics now has 2 leagues that they are making their shit-ass jerseys for the actual athletes. In classic Fanatics fashion, they will not actually be making any change to the jersey makeup before the 2026-2027 season. That's right, they need to own it for 2 years before they can make any changes, despite the fact they've already said they're going to be using the exact same factory in St. Hyacinthe in Quebec. Death to Fanatics, death to Michael Rubin for founding them, also death to their current CEO, Doug Mack. Here's why we particularly need to murder Doug Mack. The Fanatics brand already owns on-site retail stores for the New Jersey Devils and the Washington Capitals. They manage the on-site place where all of the things that they produce under the licenses that they own sells gear directly to fans. And their argument is, when the Capitals won the Cup, we were able to immediately get all of that championship merchandise out to them. And that seems like a pretty small price to pay for giving them a complete monopoly over memorabilia manufacturing. In fact, Doug Mack went ahead and said what's really exciting about this vertically integrated relationship. No, cut off the quote there. You just said the thing that you're not supposed to legally be doing. And it just blows my mind that we have all of these assholes with opinions about sports who tend to very often align with conservative mentalities that are all about originalism and stuff. And sure, there weren't professional sports around at the time of the framers, but there was a president who was a Republican, just as a bonus, who did have really strong feelings about sports and also passed a bunch of law. Didn't pass, he wasn't in Congress, but signed a bunch of laws regarding the destruction of monopolies. There was a guy who was in charge of this company, this country, sorry, getting a little taken over there by the corporate orgy, but there was a chief executive that would not have wanted this to happen. And yet we continue to let Fanatics just increase its overwhelming growth over everything like some disgusting fungus. I hate Fanatics. We will continue to hate Fanatics this year and bring you updates about how much we hate Fanatics.
Important thing to remember about the Fanatics and Michael Rubin, though, is that Michael Rubin kicks back some of that money to James Harden to circumvent the NBA salary cap. And I think that's a good thing that we should all celebrate.
Will you stoop so low, sir?
For James Harden and an NBA championship, I will stoop very low, sir. I will stoop under this chair. I will stoop under the floor. I will lift up the floorboards and get into the foundation. I will stoop as low as I need to.
If I thought anyone remotely would appreciate a reference to the turn of the century comedic play She Stoops to Conquer, I would go on at that for about 2 minutes here. But instead of talking about obscure British comedies, Xavier, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about the guys that we are discussing today?
I would be happy to. For this week, I want to talk about people who are only guys in America. They're from a different country, and they have made a massive impact in their homeland and made some sort of impact in America. Like, people in America know of them, but nowhere near like the level of stardom that they have in their home nation. So that's what I wanted to go for this week. And I wanted to kick that off by talking about hockey. I started watching the Rangers at a weird time. I'm sure I watched some games beforehand, but the earliest that I can really remember religiously watching a Ranger season was middle school, which is later than I had gotten into pretty much every other sport other than soccer. The first real season I remember is the 05-06 season. At this point, the Rangers were very bad. They had just gone 7 years in a row without making the playoffs. But what I would not realize at that time is fun to look back on is that's the rookie season of Henrik Lundqvist. He would go, of course, go on to be my favorite Ranger of all time, but there was something else that was pretty special about this team. The 05-06 Rangers were essentially the Czech national team. Of the Rangers' top 15 scorers for the season, 8 had been born in Czechoslovakia, or the then Czechoslovakia, 7 of which later played for the Czech Republic, 1 played for Slovakia, and 6 of their top 8 scorers were born in Czechoslovakia. So very, very geographically focused. This included leading scorer of the team and ageless wonder and great hockey hair-haver Jaromír Jágr, the scorer of the greatest ever shootout goal in the first year of hockey doing shootouts, Marek Malik, guy who is the only hockey jersey I've ever owned, Peter Pruka, and multiple other contributors like Marcel Hossa, Martin Ruchinski, Peter Sikora, and Michael Roosevelt. The last guy on that list is the one that I want to talk to you about, and his name is Martin Straka.
Martin Straka. And he is, so just to clarify, is he one of the Czech ones, or is he the one Slovakian one?
He is one of the Czech ones.
Okay.
Hossa is the one Slovakian one. The other 7 all play for the Czech national team at some point. So, Martin Straka was born September 3rd, 1972 in Pilsen, which is in the now Czech Republic. You may have heard of Pilsen because it is where Pilsner beer was invented. And they allegedly have some of the greatest beer in the history of the world.
Pilsner beer, or as 50-year-old dads across America would call it, beer.
So Straka, grew up playing hockey from a young age, and he joined his hometown club, HC Skoda Pilsen. As a 17-year-old, he dominated the youth league with 71 points in 34 games, and quickly gets promoted to the senior side in the last years of the then Czechoslovak First Ice Hockey League. For people who don't know, Czechoslovakia had a peaceful dissolution in 1992 and became the Czech Republic and Slovakia. So at this point, it is still Czechoslovakia in the Czechoslovak First Ice Hockey League. the age of 19, he was already a point-per-game player. He scored 55 points on 27 goals and 28 assists in 50 games to lead Pilsen to the championship series. This was the first time they had made a championship since 1959. They did fall to Dalka Trenčín 3-1, but regardless, this is the closest they had ever been to a title. This is a team that's been around since 1929, have never won a title in their history. But this 19-year-old
still have not won a title.
We will get to that later.
Sorry, I don't mean to jump ahead.
But Straka had taken them as close as they'd ever gotten, and scouts took notice. Just a few months later, he gets drafted number 19 overall in the 1992 draft by the Pittsburgh Penguins. He splits his first season between the Pens and the Cleveland Lumberjacks of the IHL. Nothing too flashy, but then his sophomore season really comes on strong, and he scores 64 points in 84 games. Penguins finish second in the East, but they then get upset by the Capitals in the first round. Fortunately, he can't really build on this as there is a lockout after this season. And so he goes home to the now Czech Republic. It has dissolved while he has been away in America, and goes back to play for Pilsen in the now Czech Extraliga. Plays 19 games, scores 21 points, he's feeling good. Then the lockout ends, so it's time to go back to Pittsburgh. This shortened season kind of never finds his footing. Before the season ends, he gets traded to the Ottawa Senators. Brutal. And from here, it's a bit of a strange year for him. So April 7th, 1995 is when he's traded to the Senators. And on January 23rd, 1996, he gets traded again to the Islanders in a 3-team deal. He scores 12 points in 22 games and gets placed on waivers. He's then claimed by the Florida Panthers on March 15th, 1996. So this is his 4th team in less than 1 calendar year. Pretty insignificant production with Florida. Only scores 35 points in 67 games and becomes a free agent after the 96-97 season. But then he gets a shot with his original club, and Pittsburgh does sign him to begin the 97-98 season.
All of that just to end up in fucking Pittsburgh again.
He's back in Pittsburgh, and he has, a solid year, nothing special, but the best that he's had in a while. And he puts up 42 points in 75 games, which was good for 5th on the team. But more importantly, this puts him back on the radar of the Czech national team. For context, Straka had been a main part of the 1990 European junior side that finished 3rd, and the 1991 World Junior side that also finished 3rd. But since then, he had barely played for the senior side. He only played in 3 out of 6 games, scoring 1 point in the 1994 World Championships. And he only played 1 game with 0 points at the 1996 World Cup of Hockey, which is essentially a B tournament, because just a couple months prior, the Czechs had won the 96 World Championships without Straka. So at this point, there was no expectation that he was really on the radar of the team, or that he was going to have a chance to make the Olympic team. But this good bounce-back season with the Penguins does get him on that 98 Olympic team, and he gets some significant minutes. He scores and assisted in the group stage against Kazakhstan, gets an assist in the 4-1 quarterfinal win over the USA. As a funny side note, this was the first time that the NHL had actually shut down for the Olympics. So although Dream Teams had started in 1984, this was the first time that all star players had been released for the Olympics. And the USA was so upset about losing to the Czechs in the quarterfinals. Afterwards, they went back to the Olympic Village and trashed all of their rooms, causing massive damage to 3 apartments, throwing chairs and fire extinguishers 5 stories down into the courtyard. Their captain, Chris Chelios, had to write a check for $3,000 to cover the damage, even though he wasn't actually there at the time that it happened. But it was a pretty bad look for the USA.
We're never going to beat the "we're terrible tourists" rumors, are we?
No, but this sets up a semifinal against Canada, who were very, very, very highly favored. And the Czechs win 2-1 in a shootout. This loss is actually still controversial in Canada because their coach does not use Wayne Gretzky in the shootout. Don't know why. You'd think if you have Wayne Gretzky, you would use him, but they didn't.
Isn't that too, at least in, I think, recent Olympics, after, I believe, the 3rd guy goes in a shootout, you can just keep putting the same guy up there. So you could have, in theory, just spammed...
Just run out Wayne Gretzky excessively.
until the other team doesn't score, because obviously Wayne Gretzky's going to score each time. I don't know if it's like noble. Is it like in a video game when you have the star and you're in first place in Mario Kart and you're like, you know what? I don't want to do it. I want to keep it at least a little bit fair. Is that what their thinking was? Because that's the only like rationale I can wrap my head around.
Well, so it's actually kind of wild. So in the shootout, Canada missed all 5 attempts. Theo Fleury misses, and then Ray Bourque misses, Joseph Nieuwendyk misses, Eric Lindros misses, and Brendan Shanahan misses.
Yo, first of all, I love Ray Bourque, but why the fuck do we have a defenseman going second in the shootout?
It just winds up to slap shot it from the very top of the skate. Also, I was curious, I was just looking it up. Do you know the arena that almost all of the Czech games were played in here in Nagano, Japan?
I mean, I do know, but Diaz can guess.
I have no guess. Hit me.
It is called the Big Hat.
It is indeed the Big Hat.
Just wanted to share that.
So the Czechs advance, and they make it to the gold medal match, where they beat Russia 1-0 for their first and so far only Olympic hockey gold medal for men's ice hockey. Very famous victory for the Czechs. This is still a team that is idolized by Czech hockey players and just like sports fans in the Czech Republic.
They scored that
upsets.
one goal, and the Big Hat went fucking wild.
They drank so much Pilsner. So after this, Straka takes the momentum from this and comes back to the U.S. and sets a career high. Gets 35 goals and 48 assists for a total of 83 points. This is the first time that he's a point-per-game player outside of the Czech Republic. He even makes the All-Star team for Team World. This was back when they did Team North America versus Team World. And he even ends up leading the Penguins in points in the playoffs with 15 and 13 games. They beat the Devils in round 1 before falling to the Leafs in the conference semis. Next season, Mario Lemieux comes back after cancer and ends up having a career year playing with Mario Lemieux, 2000 to 2001, 95 points in 82 games. And he's really turning it on. Fortunately, he then breaks his leg at the start of the 2001-2002 season, which for a player like Straka, who was 5'9" and predicated a lot on his quickness and, his puck handling, this was a big blow. He misses the entire season, comes back, but struggles. His points aren't what they were before, but he is able to perform on the international stage. At the World Championships in 2003, he leads the Czech team in scoring with 6 goals and 4 assists. They finished 4th, losing to their previous compatriots, Slovakia, in the bronze medal match. But he continues to struggle in the U.S. He gets traded to the Kings in November, and over the course of the 2003-2004 season, he only puts up 26 points. Then we have another lockout, because hockey loves their lockouts. He goes back home to Pilsen and has another great season in the Czech Extraliga. And using this as a springboard, he's again a major part of the Czech team at the 2005 Worlds. He scores in the second group stage in games against Slovakia and Belarus. They beat the USA in the quarters 3-2. He scores in a 3-2 overtime win against Sweden in the semis, setting up a gold medal match against Canada. The Czechs win 3-0, securing a world title and a second international gold for Marty Straka.
Hell yeah. Double gold. Here, quick question though. Do we have any information as to whether or not the United States destroyed another hotel room after that loss to the Czech Republic this time?
We do not know, unfortunately, but maybe, maybe they were all so stressed out.
Let's try and give the benefit of the doubt that maybe they learned from last time.
I don't know. I don't know if I can ever give the USA the benefit of the doubt, but we'll see. So his form in the Extraliga and for the national team gets him a free agent contract with the New York Rangers in August of 2005. And, as already explained, this is the first season where I'm religiously watching the Rangers. And, he gets off to a quick start. It probably felt like home with so many national teammates there. Eventually, he gets called into the Czech squad for the 2006 Olympics in Turin, along with teammates Jágr, Ruchinski, and Malik. This led to a great headline in the February 24th, 2006 issue of the New York Times. The headline says, Czech team, but accent is New York, Nooyawk. This is right after the quarterfinals. The American team has lost. but the Czech team is still in it. And it says, the New York Olympic hockey team has outlasted the United States Olympic hockey team. As the Americans take flight, the New Yorkers take center ice. They will play Sweden in the semifinals under the alias the Czech Republic. Never mind such titles, the Czech Republic has about as many players living in Manhattan as the Yankees.
We are so quick to just take away the achievements of anyone else for ourselves.
We are, especially New York. But this was actually like a tough Olympic tournament for the Czech team. In the first game, Dominik Hasek gets injured. And in the third group game, Finland's Jarkko Ruutu decks Jaromir Jagr into the board so hard that he just lies there in a pool of his own blood for a while Straka fights Ruutu in retaliation. Despite this, they do make the quarterfinals, where they beat Slovakia 3-2 with a goal by Straka. And this leads to a semifinal matchup with Sweden, where the Czech Rangers go up against Henrik Lundqvist. If you know your history, Sweden does win this game en route to winning Olympic gold. But the Czechs bounce back, and they beat Russia 3-0 in the bronze medal match, with Straka scoring again. Overall, Straka finished tied for 6th in points with the tourney with 8 in 8 games, tied with Olli Jokinen, Mats Sundin, and Pavel Datsyuk. To this date, the 98 gold and the 2006 bronze are the only Olympic medals for the Czechs in men's ice hockey, and Straka has both of them. Back in New York, has a great season, 76 points in 82 games as the Rangers break their playoff drought. After the season, he gets named alternate captain along with Brendan Shanahan. Puts up 70 points in 76 games and leads the Rangers to a first-round upset of the Atlanta Thrashers. Gets 10 points in 10 playoff games, leads the team in assists. This is like my favorite Rangers team because it was such a weird group of players and that I remember so vividly. Straka plays one more season with the Rangers before deciding that, I want to go home. I want to go back to the Czech Republic. So he signs a 1-year deal with Pilsen. Because of the club's financial distress, Straka also becomes co-owner and GM, investing a significant amount of his own money to keep them from going bankrupt. At the age of 36, the playing contract was expected to be, relatively short, but they were hoping that he could save the team financially. But instead, Straka plays 5 more years for Pilsen and is insanely productive. He ended up with 257 points in 235 games. During his last season in 2012-2013, the now 40-year-old Straka was still incredibly productive. He was 7th in the Extraliga in scoring with 54 points in 47 games, but he still had one more thing he really wanted to achieve before he was done. In the playoffs, the 3-seed Pilsen beats Litvinov 4-3 in the quarterfinals. Then they beat Slavia Prague 4-2 in the semifinals, setting up a championship series against number 1 seed Zlin. After a back-and-forth series where Pilsen won, then Zlin won twice, then Pilsen twice, and then Zlin again, the stage was set for a Game 7 in Zlin. After a goalless first, Pilsen goes up 1-0 early in the second. 4 minutes later, Zlin ties it. Later in the second, Straka gets an assist as Pilsen goes back up 2-1, but then Zlin equalized again before the period's over. 10 minutes into the third, Straka again assists a goal as Pilsen goes up 3-2. As time ticks down, it looks like they're going to hang on. And then Zlin gets a power play in the last minute of the game. With 2 extra skaters on after pulling their goalie, Zlin scores with 10 seconds left in the game to tie it 3-3, forcing overtime. First overtime comes and goes, tense, back and forth, but no one's able to break through. Second overtime comes. Clock continues to tick. Chances came and went. Players are exhausted at this point. And as the timer hits 96:15, Straka lets loose a wrist shot. Quote, "I really thought the goalie caught it, but then I saw how the boys were rejoicing. It was an amazing feeling. It falls under his hand and into the net. Off the stick of hometown hero Martin Straka, Pilsen had won their first ever title in its 83-year history."
That's a long fucking time to wait for your first title. I'm trying to think of a similar... Hanshin Tigers, of teams that we've talked about recently, I think are about as long as anyone's gone. Even that's only probably about 50 years or so.
I mean, I found an article from a Czech website from the day after that had a fantastic lead. Hockey Pilsen is experiencing a fairy tale. For the first time in its history, it has become a champion. The curse of West Bohemia was broken in the second overtime of the 7th final by its king, Martin Straka.
I also realize as we say this, the Phillies definitely waited more than 83 years for their
I was
first
about
title.
to say, 92. Nobody was. It was 92.
Well, who's the Phillies' Martin Straka?
I mean, I would say Jamie Moyer, but that's the 08 team. Jamie Moyer kind of works for that.
Here's something we can look up. We have StatHead. We're going to see if any of them were born in just Pennsylvania. Oh, fuck. It's not giving me state. Oh, wait. Oh, yes, it is, baby. StatHead never fails. How dare I doubt you? We have 2 1980 Phillies from the state of Pennsylvania. One of them is Sparky Lyle, who, as far as I can tell, pitched not very much. But the other guy we have is Greg Gross, who did appear in 127 games of the 182.
Greg Gross.
York, Pennsylvania. Greg Gross. So there you go. That's your Martin Straka, baby.
Listen, York, Philly, very close. Don't look it up if you haven't seen it. Just trust us.
Well, with that, Straka has accomplished what had previously never been accomplished for his hometown team, and he does announce his retirement from professional hockey. He does come back a little later and works as assistant coach for a little bit for the Czech national team, but since then, he's really kept a bit of a lower profile.
What's he do with the team now? Because it seems like a guy who can't just like hang up his skates and walk away fully. Is he still hanging around the organization?
I believe he still owns part of Pilsen.
Okay.
I think he stays more like to the back, but I believe he does still own them. He's listed as the general manager still, but I don't know if that's fully accurate or if they just have that as his title because he still owns the team. Yeah, I mean, that is the scorer of the only championship-winning goal in their history and kept them from bankruptcy with his own money. So he's still considered, especially in Pilsen, a local hero, if not a national hero for his part to play in a World Championships gold, an Olympic bronze, and Pilsen's first and still to this date, only ever championship in what is now their 94-year history. He is very beloved there. He's probably second in love to beer. But, you know, if you live in the city that invented Pilsner, that's probably pretty good.
If you must come in second to something, it is respectable. No, I'm thrilled to learn about an avatar of a team that matters a lot to you, Xavier. I'll acknowledge that. That's going to give him some bonus points. I like to reward your emotions in that capacity.
Thank you, James. You know, I would love to hear who you have brought today, though.
I would be happy to share because, folks, guess what? We will talk about the World Baseball Classic just a tiny bit more. This is not someone that I had any personal attachment to prior to this World Baseball Classic, but it is someone that I learned about. We're going to be going down under, mates. We are going to go down under to Australia, where there's some argument about what the most popular sport is, maybe, but there's no argument about what the 2 most popular sports are. That's rugby and cricket. Just so happens that rugby is a fall and winter sport and cricket is a spring and summer sport, so they don't cross over too much. They each just kind of like lacrosse and hockey in Canada have their own realms during their own seasons, and there's no real competition. That is not to say that other sports don't exist in Australia. For instance, baseball was first brought there in the 1850s. There was a gold rush in Victoria, which is in like southeastern Australia, and a bunch of American prospectors show up, and in their downtime, they just play baseball. So that's how it gets here, but it remains a super niche interest for a long time. Thankfully, about a century later or so, there is a guy who has this niche interest. This isn't our guy, but he is a guy, Tim Nilsson. Tim Nilsson has this niche interest in the 1960s while he's running this print company that he started for his family. And in his leisure time, he is a pitcher for the Redcliffe Padres Club. This is in Brisbane, Australia. So we're in the northeast now. It's in Victoria, in Queensland. And he and his wife, Pat, they're raising this growing family towards the end of the 60s. And I mean the tail end of the 60s. We're going to December 14th, 1969. Nice. That is when the youngest of their 4 sons is born. Our guy today, David Wayne Nilsson, better known to the world as Dave Nilsson. And that's not me trying to say it in a bad Australian accent. It is spelled with an I.
Okay.
Dave Nilsson, as I said, belongs to 4 boys, and all 4 of these boys, because Tim Nilsson has this weird niche interest in Australia baseball, that like loser sport, he gets all 4 of his sons super into it, and they're all pretty solid. Bob Nilsson in 1978. He is actually the first ever Australian to sign a pro contract in America with Cincinnati, but he never reaches the majors. His brother Gary plays for an A team with the Tigers. Ron plays in a bunch of the Australian professional leagues. But Dave in particular is who we're going to focus in on. He's a strong, stocky young kid. If he was in like literally any other family in Australia, they would have been like, oh, you are either a rugby or an Aussie rules football player. Like, that's the only things that your body type are going to get put into as a child for athletics. But Tim Nilsson, weird dude, puts him in baseball. And he doesn't have a lot of natural talent, but even early on, like his under 12 coach, Reg Bacty, saying, he was a porky little bloke with bow legs and 3'2" high, but chock-a-block full of confidence. You could see he was going to make it because he had the determination. Really, that's going to be something that comes to define Dave Nilsson, that overcoming a lack of maybe overwhelming physical skills by just sheer willpower. As a teenager, he does fill out a little bit, gets up to 6'3", 185 pounds in high school while he's playing for the Queensland Rams. This is the state team for Queensland in it. That's going to be kind of how like national Australia baseball competitions take place. It's on a state level, and the all-star team of that state. They go on a U.S. tour for a couple weeks in the summer of '86, and he catches the eye of a couple Milwaukee scouts. Now, he's not in the draft pool. While we normally think of international free agents as, to put it bluntly, brown people, David Wayne Nilsson is also an international free agent. So he is signed for very, very little, 10 to 65,000, somewhere in that range. We don't know officially, but he is signed by the Brewers at the time, headed by scouting director and future Orioles GM Dan Duquette. They signed him in 1987. Now, to clarify, if Dave Nilsson makes the majors, he will not be the first Australian to make the majors. There was a dead baller, Joe Quinn, like way, way back, who is probably best known as the best hitter and the player manager for the 1899 Cleveland Spiders, which, yes, are those Cleveland Spiders. While he is the player manager, they have a 12-104 record. He retires with an overall managerial win percentage of $1.48.
Still better than me. Also, bring back the Spiders. It's a much better name than the Guardians.
I've warmed to Guardians. I'm not going to lie. I'm down with Guardians. I think it's cool that they use a different font for once. We need more fonts in baseball jerseys, honestly, so I'm all for it. In 1986, another Aussie, Craig Shipley. So we're talking now like a modern day peer, and actually the Shipley family and the Nilsson family are two like big Australian baseball families. So he was a middle infielder for the Dodgers. We'll talk about him a little bit later, but still, it is a very small amount of Australians. But 17-year-old Dave Nilsson has some potential. He gets signed. He immediately goes to winter ball, but not in Venezuela, not in Mexico, not in the Dominican. No, he goes to play Australian winter ball, which is also the professional baseball he's already been playing up to this point because it is their summer after all. And so pretty much his entire pro career, scheduling wise at least, he can always play in both Australia and America, which is pretty neat. This year, he's playing in the Claxton Shield. This had been the top Australian competition for a while, and it's, again, interstate competition. There's a round robin, and then there's a quick final bracket. In the 1982 season, just a little bit before Dave Nilsson had joined the Queensland Rams, they just ended their 42-year drought, so this is still a team that's not used to winning. But in 1987, Nilsson's first appearance in the Claxton Shield, not only do they win another title, he takes home the Helms Award for tournament MVP at the age of 17. I'll remind you, when he rides that momentum back to the U.S., starts out with the Helena Brewers in Rookie League, batting .394, absolutely mashing. Only one digger, power's not there yet. But the big thing is he had been playing first base primarily up to this point. Brewers do start training him as a catcher. We continue with his journey through the minors and returning every winter to Australia. Struggles a little bit in A-ball. Some knee surgeries keep him out of Claxton the next year. Comes back, he's in high A in 88 and 89. He's getting better. The defense, in particular, getting better. He's starting to be looked at now as like a real prospect versus just kind of this novelty, like this Australian minor leaguer that we have. And part of that is, again, he just works so hard at self-improvement. And every single coach and manager, they take note, they mention it. He goes back to Australia, and now they've briefly, instead of the Claxton Shield, established an Australian baseball league. Plays for the Gold Coast Clippers. They're eventually going to become the Daikyo Dolphins after they get bought out by a Japanese company that just continues to manage this Australian baseball team.
That's fantastic. I love that so much.
It's very good. We will discuss a little bit. There's a very pan-Pacific baseball kind of fraternity that he is very much a part of and tries to nurture. Daikyo does make it to the championship that first time. Gold Coast Clippers that time make it. He's doing so well that it's really affecting his stock here in America as well. By 91, he's gotten all the way up to the number 8 Baseball America prospect. He is in the Australian Baseball League. Part of the reason he's impressing is all of his numbers are great. There's a rule where anyone who's signed to a professional team outside of Australia in any capacity has to use a wooden bat. And all the other guys are allowed to use aluminum bats. So when he's putting up league-leading offensive numbers, he's doing it against guys that could basically put up college baseball numbers at will.
I wish I played in leagues like that as a kid. Okay, you're too good, you get a wooden bat. Xavier, you suck, you get the aluminum bat. I would have had way more fun.
Well, he's still having a lot of fun. They win the championship in 1992, the Dolphins. Finally, after this year, he's proven himself in the minors. He's proven himself abroad. It's time for him to debut with the Milwaukee Brewers. Going to get called in to replace their backup catcher in May of 92. Very first game, bases clearing double, 3 RBI to eventually win the game for him. But gets an injured wrist. I mean, he's had a couple surgeries during his time in the minors and in Australian Baseball League. And so he bounces up and down during the late summer. Overall, in the rookie year, it's solid. 51 games, 232, a little bit more pop. He's got 4 home runs on the year. In 93, longtime catcher for the Brewers and future Orioles legend B.J. Surhoff, he gets moved to third base. And so now space is cleared from Nilsson. He did end up having to get surgery for that wrist, but he recovers very quickly. For most of the season, he is the starting catcher. Best thing that happens for them this year in a pretty unremarkable year is on April 14th, pitcher for the Brewers, Graham Lloyd, is also from Australia. So they were the first ever Australian battery to pitch and receive in a Major League Baseball game. It is unfortunately in an absolute blowout loss to the Angels, which they comment on later. It was a real great moment, wasn't it? Just wish it would have happened in a better game. He does hurt himself again this season, sliding into a base in May, but he ends up playing still a full 100 games, slashing 257, 336, 357, with a career-high 3 stolen bases. And in the winter, he goes home and just plays with the hometown Brisbane Bandits and casually picks up another ABL title. So, ascending here in 93 is one of the hot young catchers in the league. We come into 94, it's a strong start, and then he tears the thumb ligament. He is allowed by doctors to do a Bryce Harper for a little bit. He is allowed to just DH. In fact, on June 17th, 11 days after tearing a thumb ligament, he does hit a grand slam, after which teammate Greg Vaughn says, "I'm going to go slam my thumb in a door." During the 94 strike, he goes home and he signs an ABL contract with the Melbourne Reds that does include a large equity in the team. Because already now, he's starting to think, what can I do for the future of this sport that I love, that I want to develop in my home, with the wealth that I'm accumulating as a pretty solid professional catcher now. There is a downside to his trip to Australia during the 94 strike. It's not an injury this time. That's the good news. The bad news is he catches a rare mosquito-borne illness called Ross River fever, and is laid up for weeks and months eventually before he is able to rejoin the Brewers in June in 95. So he does still get to play a little bit. His 278 average and 12 home runs and 53 RBI in just 81 games. If you doubled that, it would actually be his best season ever. Too bad that he got a rare mosquito-borne illness to start it.
You know what? That's what happens when you live in Australia. Some rare bug or giant scary thing will get you at some point.
Couldn't agree more. You are living in conflict with nature at all times. So he decides, let's come back to the US. Let's focus on the majors again. 123 games in 1996, 6th in the AL in batting average, 12 dingers. And while he has a minor stress fracture at one point in spring training, largely he's able to play most of this. He also has 2 home runs in the same inning at one point. That's just fun. Gets back to Australia in the offseason, has this whole kerfuffle with Melbourne. So he goes back to the Brisbane Bandits, where in 16 games, he does bat .420.
Nice.
I wanted us to appreciate that nice before I tell you he does then get arthroscopic knee surgery.
Not nice.
It does not stop him from signing a 3-year deal before the 97 season. During the 97 season, he plays a lot at first base because this guy, John Jaha, who I did not know about, he's of Syrian and Lebanese descent and had been the starting first baseman for the Brewers at the same time that they have this Australian catcher. Just what a wild Milwaukee Brewers team we have here in the late 90s. John Jaha, unfortunately, he is injured, but our boy Dave is going to be fully healthy. No DL trip at all this season. The first time since 1994, 278, 352, 446 for an excellent slash line.
I'm just not surprised to see how worldly this team was for the Brewers. I mean, we've said it time and time again on this podcast. Milwaukee is the cultural center of the world.
And I didn't know we were going to have talked about Pilsner for so long before dwelling here on the Milwaukee Brewers for a long time. So I'm glad we have that thematic link today. One thing that Dave Nilsson does to surprise everybody is he does not go back to Australia this year. He's like, you know what? I'm having a lot of injuries and stuff here by playing baseball year round. Maybe I should take a little bit of time off. Here's the thing, though. In 1998, he still somehow needs knee surgery. He just tweaks it at one point. And he sees what happens to the ABL when he's not there. Because in 1998, they're on the verge of financial bankruptcy. On Christmas Eve, Dave Nilsson. I don't think he was visited by three ghosts prior to this, but we can't say for certain that he was not. He does go ahead and pull out the checkbook and write a $3.5 million check to purchase the ABL through his own company, Nilcorp, and he is going to form what we will now know as the International Baseball League of Australia. While he's not going to play, we'll see how that turns out, but first we have to return for another season with the Brewers. In 1999, Dave Nilsson has perhaps his single finest major league season. He's back at catcher. He'd only played catcher for 15 games in the last 3 seasons before this. By mid-season, he's batting .311 with 19 dingers. He is, for the first time ever, an all-star as a replacement, but he is the all-star National League catcher. He is the first ever Aussie to get an all-star spot. Grant Balfour is another one who has gotten 1, and Liam Hendricks now has 3 as of this recording. Those are the 3 Australian all-stars you've ever had. Unfortunately, he does strike out in his one appearance that day, and he does only hit 2 more home runs the rest of the season after hitting 19 in the first half. But altogether, a catcher with an OPS of 141 at the age of 29, clearly going to be one of the marquee free agents. He also, by the way, made $5.7 million already this year, so he's doing okay. And then he retires from Major League Baseball. Now, why is this? Well, in November of 1999, he played for Australia in the Intercontinental Cup. This was a biennial competition, and during this time, Cuba dominated it. From 1975 until 1999, they won 8 out of the 14 championships, including 7 straight from 83 to 95. In 1997, Australia had just medaled for the first time by getting 3rd, but now they're the hosts. Cuba ends up facing Australia in the finals. And Australia shockingly wins 4-3 with Dave as the MVP of the team and an all-star in the tournament. It is a landmark moment for Australian international baseball, and it stokes this fire in him. As he's a free agent, he's talking to all of these guys, and he says, hey, look, there's something that's really important to me. Australia's about to host the 2000 Olympics. I need to be on the Australian Olympic baseball team in those Olympics. And all the major league teams are like, no, I'm sorry, dude, you cannot leave the team for a couple weeks. And so he decides, okay, if that's the case, this matters more to me right now. I am not signed with the major league team. He signs with the pride of Nagoya, the Chunichi Dragons.
Yeah!
Because they say they will let him go to the Olympics. Let's fucking go. Dave Nilsson, Dragons legend. He's very bad with the Dragons. He does wear a jersey that says Dingo. I swear to God, his jersey says Dingo while he is a Chunichi Dragon, which is not for very long. He does not adjust to pitching the way that Randy Bass does and bats 180 in his few games there. Absolutely atrocious. However, he is going to be a lot better in the Olympics. And they get to sit. Dave Nilsson is a guy on a mission. He, in 7 games, primarily as the DH and first baseman, bats .565, 151 points clear of second place, slugs .957, and ties his MLB season high with 3 stolen bases in 7 games. And behind this monstrous performance, Team Australia rides it all the way to a 2-5 record, the second worst in the entire tournament, ahead of only winless South Africa.
Yeah!
Just a guy's batting .565 and they won 2 out of 7 games.
Before Mike Trout, there was Dave Nilsson on the Australian national team.
That being said, he has no regrets about participating in that. It was completely worth taking some time off from MLB. And he considers over the next couple years, flirting with going back there. Both times it's with the Red Sox, once because Dan Duquette now works with them, and another time because his old Aussie buddy Craig Shipley is with the scouting team. So both times it's someone just calling up, seeing how he's doing, seeing if he wants to come in, but he's not really feeling it. He's trying to focus on the IBLA, the International Baseball League of Australia. It's called the International Baseball League of Australia because, again, he's trying to bring everything in from the whole region to really grow it across the Pacific. That second year, they've got a team that's all Australian ABL players. They've got a team that's like all minor league players that happen to be associated with either an NPB team or an Australian team. They've got one that's all international players from like South Korea and Japan. And then they have one team that is exclusively Taiwanese because Taiwan has a very big baseball one. So this tournament's including people from all over the Pacific region. That is their second season. Their third season was going to be a little bit of a return to form. Unfortunately, they are canceled due to 9/11. 9/11 happens like right before they're about to start, and in its world destabilizing way, does kind of shut down the IBLA, which then collapses due to finances.
That's brutal.
It's pretty brutal. The Claxton Shield resurrects quickly. Like they get that going together between the states once again very quickly. And in 2004, Dave Nilsson decides he needs to get back into playing shape. He's been focused away from the field, but there is something that is fast approaching. That's the 2004 Athens Olympics.
Before we get to the Olympics, I have been trying to catch up on Dave Nilsson as you've been going, James. Can we just acknowledge his 2003 season in Italy real quick?
Please, by all means. So it's in Serie A, just as it is with fucking football.
Right. So it's their top flight. He only bats 280, which is like a fine average. His slugging percentage is 920.
Everything leaves the park.
That is absurd. Yeah, because basically it's saying of every 5 hits that he gets, like 1's going to be a single and 4 are going to be home runs. Is roughly what that math comes out to. That's bonkers. Absolutely bonkers. Just backfooting everything. Matt Stairs would be proud.
Matt Stairs would tip his cap. Matt Stairs might actually be participating for Canada, I think, as we approach this next competition. Because we're going to go just a little bit away from Italy, to Greece, to Athens. Dave comes in saying it will be a disappointment if we do not medal this time. So he's gone out and he's assembled a crack team. He went and he got Graham Lloyd to pick the ball back up. Graham Lloyd actually been out of the majors for a little bit now, but he's going to come pitch for them. Goes and gets Shipley as a special assistant. He's bringing the whole gang in. They can't get Grant Balfour at this time because Grant Balfour is now like an established major leaguer. He had been on that 2000 team. He is not on this 2004 one. And the 2014 does not get off to a good start. They do go 0-2 to begin, but they battle back. They qualify for the knockout rounds with a 4-3 record in the pool play. You don't really know what to expect from them because their last 2 games are a 22-2 win over the Netherlands and an 11-0 loss against Canada.
Take that, Dutch.
Really? Yeah, that's a transitive 33-2 loss from the Netherlands to Canada.
But at this point, were the Netherlands being racist and not using players from the Caribbean yet?
It did largely seem to be Dutch when I was looking at the roster names. Plus, again, there's like no MLB participation.
Okay.
However, that's not going to matter because their prize for getting out of group play is a match with Japan, which of course does not need MLB participation, as we know. Daisuke Matsuzaka. This is a loaded team. He's their ace at this point, but they've also got Kosuke Fukudome, Koji Iwahara, Hisashi Iwakuma. This is a stacked Japan team. And Daisuke strikes out 13 in 7 innings pitched against the Australians. In the 6th inning, Nilsson gets a walk, and it's part of the rally that scores the only run Australia gets for the entire day. However, Australia is able to hold the vaunted Japan offense to just 5 hits. And despite also contributing 2 Australian errors, that is enough to keep them shut out. It is a 1-0 astonishing win by the Australian team over Japan to get them their first ever finals berth, guaranteed them a medal in the Olympics. I'll go ahead and say it's a very underwhelming 6-2 loss to Cuba. There's like nothing super fun to say about it. Just Cuba thumps them pretty soundly, but Australia takes home the silver medal. This was their first medal since that 1999 International Cup, and it is still, to date, their last hardware as an international team. But it's not the end of Nilsson's international career. He appears in the first ever World Baseball Classic in 2006. Goes 0 for 5 with a strikeout, but he's in there. He starts now working at like the MLB Australian Academy as an instructor. He's still always focused on building the game. And in part due to his efforts in 2007, this is a big moment for Australia. They get their first officially affiliated Little League. And so now they can participate in the Little League World Series. So for all of these accomplishments in 2008, he is inducted into the Sport Australia Hall of Fame. But you know what? Dave Nilsson has some more shit to prove.
Love it.
There's a new ABL now. He returns to the Brisbane Bandits as manager in the 2010-2011 season. He and Graham Lloyd throw and receive the ceremonial first pitch, echoing their days as Brewers. He leaves after one May year. Comes back in 2014-2015, and now despite like losing their second game ever with him as manager, 23-2, he gets them out of that tailspin of the first early years of the Brisbane Bandits here. They end up becoming the first team to three-peat in Australian Pro Ball since the late 1970s from 2015 to 2018. This earns him the job as the manager for the national Australian team before they real quick win a fourth straight trophy. Now, he's all set for the 2020 World Baseball Classic, which someday we will say about many people the way we say about the 1980 Summer Olympics, because obviously there is not a 2020 World Baseball Classic. His debut as manager is delayed due to COVID for quite some time, but this year in 2023, he did finally get to serve as their skipper. They start off with the shocking 8-7 win over South Korea and end up finishing 3-1 to qualify for the knockout round, where after the International Cup, after the finals in the Olympics, once again, they face what I did not know to apparently be their arch nemesis in international baseball, but it is Cuba once again. And they fall to Cuba in what I think we remember as a very respectable 4-3 loss.
I want a documentary on the Australia-Cuba rivalry. I need that.
Xavier, no time like the present to start writing a script. Dave Nilsson, he had like a little bit more of a flirtation with MLB. He plays for the Richmond affiliate of the Atlanta baseball team. I'm trying very hard not to say the name, for like 7 games, but then comes back to Australia. It's all about Australia now, and the sport is in a good place there. They've automatically qualified for the 2026 WBC, that growth at the youth level. Since 2013, just 6 years after they started that Little League, they have become an automatic Little League World Series qualifier, so they've got someone going there every year. Currently from that Australian team, they've now got one major leaguer, Aaron Whitefield of the Angels. 6 of them are in the minors right now. And some of those guys, Mitch and Jay Nilsson, the nephews of Dave Nilsson, because the Nilsson family continues to have a hand in Australian Pro Ball. Here's the thing. I think there's a lot of what-ifs with Dave Nilsson because of injury, disease, and patriotism. But I don't want to lose sight of what Dave Nilsson was. By B-War, he is still today the most valuable Australian baseball player of all time. Liam Hendriks will probably pass him this year. Liam Hendriks has already passed him in Fangraphs WAR, but by B-War, for right now, it is still Dave Nilsson. In fact, if you go to position players, the only other Australian who's even above 1 right now is that dead baller Joe Quinn. So, sure, Dave Nilsson could have had much more of a career. There was clearly a lot of potential there. But even now, he is still, relative to a small field, a titan. And I'm sure he won't mind when Liam Hendriks passes him in B-War. I'm sure he will be thrilled when some other position players pass him, because Dave Nilsson wants that game to keep growing. That's what his passion is. He's been a captain. He's been a dingo. He's been a national icon. And I think he is also a guy.
That was very fun. And it's so interesting to think about Australia, because they are, I think, the most similar country to the U.S. in terms of variation of sports that they enjoy. I mean, most countries in the world, it's one sport that's the main sport that everyone plays and maybe a secondary side sport. And Australia, obviously we talked about like Australian rules football, rugby, cricket, but they also have like a budding soccer league, basketball, baseball. And it's interesting to think that, like, despite all of their love of sports, still Dave Nilsson, who is the progenitor of Australian baseball, essentially.
Some respect must still be paid to Tim Nilsson, because if Tim Nilsson wasn't some weird jockey hipster in the 1960s who insisted on liking like the least popular sport in Australia, we wouldn't have his entire dynastic family participating in the game still today. So credit to you, Tim
so like
Nilsson,
Richard Williams, just like,
yes, exactly.
I want my kids to do this.
Exactly. The Williams sisters and the Nilsson family.
No, I respect it a ton. I mean, and I also love that. I love that Nilsson was able to hang on long enough to participate in that first World Baseball Classic team in '06, and now continuing the legacy as best as he can. Dedication to country, a true Australian guy.
That
Couldn't
first
agree
World
more.
Baseball Classic was so weird. It's great thinking back on it now after what we just watched. But that '06 one was a lot of 40-plus-year-olds playing for their teams.
Well, that's two of our guys, but in order for the guy being able to convene, there must be a third to discuss. Diaz, why don't you go ahead and bring us on home?
Well, so it's not just the third in this discussion. This guy that I'm presenting is also the third in another lineage that we've paid tribute to here before. Actually, he's the fourth. That didn't work as well as I was hoping it was going to. Nonetheless, he's part of the lineage that we've often discussed on this podcast before. If you go to the West Coast up to Oregon, you're going to land in Portland, and you're going to see a very dissatisfying lineage of big men who weren't quite able to live up to their full potential due to injuries. You know, when you first start off, you can say Bill Walton. We've discussed at length on this podcast Sam Bowie. We've also touched on Greg Oden, who was still the correct pick over Kevin Durant in that draft. People like to say it was revisionist hindsight. Greg Oden was an absolute monster coming out of Ohio State. If he was healthy, and even when he was healthy for the Trailblazers, he was an extremely effective center. I still say that was the right pick.
I also just want to say that means whoever you're about to say is the fifth, because do not forget about Douglas Fur.
We don't want to forget Douglas Fur. I mean, and also in a modern context, you can throw in Yusuf Nurkic, who, when healthy, has been very good for the Trailblazers, but seems to just kind of be continuously battling injuries. And he's
he
not
also
the
can't
first.
play defense.
And he also can't play defense, which is very true, which is a big part of basketball that a lot of people seem to ignore. But we digress. Yusuf Nurkic is not the first Eastern European big man to have an injury past to be associated with the Portland Trailblazers, but the guy I want to talk about didn't necessarily suffer those injuries in Portland. He kind of arrived with them, but because of the basketball excellence that he put on display, which led Bill Walton to call him, quote, a 7'3" Larry Bird. I want to talk about one of the first great Eastern European big men who's potentially helped to set the wave for this current generation that we see, whether it's Nikola Jokic, whether it's Yusuf Nurkic, or whether it's his son, Domantas Sabonis. I'm talking about, of course, Arvydas Sabonis.
Arvydas Sabonis, the first boner.
The first boner to ever fully emerge and exclaim himself onto the basketball scene. But before we get too far down this trail of dick jokes, let's bring it back and let's talk about basketball. Arvydas Sabonis is born December 19th, 1964 in Kaunas, which is in modern-day Lithuania, but at the time is part of the USSR. Doesn't start playing basketball until the age of 13, but in a similar trajectory to Joel Embiid, very quickly takes to the game, and by the age of 15, he's already been named to the Soviet junior team. 1 year later, in 1981, at the age of 16, he signs with his hometown club, Zalgiris. His first couple of years, getting accustomed to playing against grown men, but by the time we're in 1984, at the age of 19, he's going to claim his first Euroscar. The Euroscar is the highest award given to a European basketball player. When I first heard this, I thought maybe this is in tribute to Oscar Schmidt, according to many, the greatest non-American basketball player of all time. But Oscar Schmidt, I learned, played primarily in South America. Yeah, primarily in Brazil. He did eventually play a couple years in Europe, but it's not named for that. It's just named for the Oscars. The
That's so stupid.
The people who came up with this award said, hey, we need to think of like a very fancy award to call our thing for the best basketball player. We're in Europe, and the last letter of Euro is O, and the first letter of that big American award show that everybody loves is also O. Let's call it the Euroscar.
So is the O'Brien Trophy. Like, you could do a better bad pun if you wanted to do a bad pun.
Listen, I'm not sure how USSR felt about Ireland. Maybe there were some problems there, but they call it the Euro-Oscar. And in 1984, at the age of 19, he claims his first Euro-Oscar. And kind of on the back of this, in 1985, he actually is drafted into the NBA. The Atlanta Hawks take him with the 77th pick in the draft. However, this pick is voided because the Hawks didn't read the CBA close enough to be able to tell that a player needs to be 21 to be able to be drafted. Arvydas was 20. He was therefore not eligible. Do not pass go. Do not collect Arvydas Sabonis, and you do not get your pick back. Sorry, Atlanta Hawks. In one way, you could look at it as sort of bad luck for Arvydas that he's not able to go over immediately. He suffers even worse luck that spring. He ruptures his Achilles. But this is back in a time where people didn't really know how important rehab and rest and, like taking care of severe injuries was. So that's not going to keep Arvydas out of this upcoming season. He's still going to play for Žalgiris, and he's actually going to play well enough with a ruptured Achilles to lead Žalgiris to the 1985 FIBA World Cup title.
So, like,
how is he moving?
Yeah.
Well, we're going to touch on that more in depth later, but kind of like, the main thing that's going for Arvydas, well, there's two things. First of all, he is 7'3", as we alluded to. But the other important thing is his skills are like very much Nikola Jokic is Nikola Jokic, but before Nikola Jokic, there was Arvydas Sabonis. Sabonis knows the game, sees the game. He's an extraordinary outside shooter, great passing big man. He has handles at 7'3", and like with his height, obviously he's slowed significantly by his Achilles, but he's still able to dictate the offense. And at 7'3", he's able to protect the rim very well as well. So despite having a ruptured Achilles, he leads Žalgiris to the 1985 Euro title. Next year, he's now 21, which means he's eligible to be drafted into the NBA. And this time, he's going to be taken by the Portland Trail Blazers. They take him at 24th overall in the first round.
So he improves his draft stock in a season where he tears his Achilles by 53 picks.
Yes, ruptures his Achilles. People don't care. Arvydas is Arvydas. Arvydas is life. Injuries aren't going to hold him back, but what will hold him back is the Soviet authorities. Not very big on their best basketball prospect going over to America and playing there. There was kind of a scheme that was being devolved too. He was originally going to go play for LSU, which would allow him to maintain his amateur status, and was kind of a workaround that they thought they'd be able to pull. Soviet government wasn't having any of that shit. So they shut that down. LSU needs to wait a couple years to get a dominant big man. And in 1989, Shaquille O'Neal committed to play for the Tigers. So there is a universe out there where a senior Arvydas Sabonis and a freshman Shaquille O'Neal absolutely decimate a bunch of poor, pimply-faced 18-year-olds en route to an NCAA tournament title.
People would have died.
That's like 14 and a half combined feet of person.
And like 600 pounds that also moves as if it's only like 400 pounds.
If the guy throwing Shaq alley-oops was also 7'3", like what the fuck do you do?
Literally nothing you could have done. So perhaps it's for the best for the future of college basketball that reality did not come to be. So, despite this plan to try to get him to LSU, Trailblazers are still going to retain his rights if he should ever come to the NBA. He's going to play for Portland. But for now, he's still got shit to do over in Europe. So in 85, he won his first Soviet title. In 86, they win the FIBA World Cup title. 87, he again wins the Soviet Cup. He is again named Mr. Euro-Oscar. And he is also named the Mr. Europa. So they basically have these two awards for the best player in Europe. He sweeps both of them. So ruptured Achilles be damned. None of it matters. He continues to get better. He continues to assert his dominance.
Here's regarding the Achilles. I know we said like he didn't get any rehab time, but like, did he at least get the surgery for it?
He doesn't get surgery until 1988. All of this is with an unserviced, unrepaired.
He just doesn't have an Achilles tendon.
He just straight up doesn't have an Achilles. It's bonkers. It's absolutely bonkers. But eventually, he is going to get this looked at. He's going to get it fixed. He goes over to Portland following the 1988 season to get surgery to repair that Achilles. He's getting some rehab done on it. Portland medical staff is very adamant, like, hey, maybe take it easy this year. Maybe don't play any basketball. But in 1988, we have the Summer Olympics, and Soviet government is not going to stand for Arvydas Sabonis not playing for the USSR. So they're going to call him back. He's going to play on a very recently repaired surgically Achilles tendon. In the semifinals, they're going to go up against Team USA. He's going to be matched up against David Robinson, notably, and he posts 13 points and 13 rebounds en route to an 82-76 victory. This would, of course, be the last time that amateurs represented Team USA. So Arvydas Sabonis single-handedly, 3 months post-Achilles surgery operation, dominated USA so badly that they said we must never allow amateurs to represent us again. Arvydas Sabonis is unequivocally the reason why we got to see the Dream Team. So say I.
I like that take. It's a bold one, but I do like that take very much.
It's the only reason, but he's not the only reason why this fairly stacked USSR team is now able to go on and win gold in those 88 Olympics. They beat Yugoslavia in the championship. I just want to take this time to kind of briefly segue and talk about Arvydas's international career in general. For the Soviet Union, he played in 6 international tournaments. In 82, when again he was only 17 years old, he helped lead the USSR to FIBA gold in their world championships. They win the bronze in 83 Eurobasket. In 85, they win the gold at Eurobasket, for which he was named the MVP. The silver at the 86 FIBA Worlds, of course, the gold at the 88 Olympics, as we just mentioned, and bronze at the 89 Olympics. Starting in 1992, USSR no longer exists. We now have Lithuania. Lithuania gets to be itself and be its own country. They win bronze at those 92 Olympic Games.
It was the Grateful Dead other Dream Team.
Oh my God, it was those fucking tie-dye jerseys.
Very true. I didn't even realize that until you just said it. Thank you for saying that, Xavier. So,
if you haven't watched the other Dream Team documentary, listeners, please do. It's fucking fantastic. It's so good. Obviously, Arvydas Sabonis is a massive part of the documentary, but yeah, please watch it.
Literally and figuratively a massive part of that documentary at 7-3. But yeah, so they win the bronze that year against all odds, against a government that either is not able to or does not want to fund them. They also claim silver at the 95 Eurobasket. 96 Olympics, they're going to claim a bronze. And in 1999, they win their group, but are upset in the quarterfinals, 74-72 by Spain. No Gasols on that team yet. I checked. I wanted there to be a Gasol. There was no Gasol. But they do finish 5th, nonetheless, despite that first round in the quarterfinals loss. Now let's go back to 1988. Coming off of that Olympic gold, he's now a free agent, and he's going to have the chance to make a little more money going to sign elsewhere, but he's not going to Portland yet. He's going to go to Spain, where he signs for Forum Valladolid. Across 3 seasons there, he's twice named the All-Star Game MVP, leads them to a cup semifinal, which was the best that the team had ever done, but they do not win any championships. They do not win any titles in his time with Forum Valladolid. We now get to 92. He's a free agent again. Still not quite ready to go across the pond. He's going to stay in Spain. He's going to sign for Real Madrid. Across 3 seasons with Real, he wins 2 Spanish league titles in 93 and 94. In 95, they don't quite get the 3-peat, but what they do get is a EuroLeague title. He's named the MVP of EuroLeague for 1995. And his averages this year, again, let's just keep in mind all of the injuries that he's already had. Being overtaxed, playing for the national team, surgically repaired Achilles. In domestic play, he averages 22.9 points to go with 12.5 boards, 2.4 assists, 1.6 steals, and 2.3 blocks. And in that EuroLeague campaign, he averaged 21.8 points with 11.2 boards, 2.6 assists, and 1.8 steals. Filling up the stat sheet everywhere he goes.
Sabonis is one of the greatest players in European history, if not world history. So his numbers are insane.
How is he putting this up
level.
and Portland isn't like trying to yank him back over to the NBA the whole time? That's really what it is.
Well, I think it's partially his desire. He wanted to prove everything that there was to prove in Europe. He wanted to dominate Europe to the best that he could. And coming off this 95 EuroLeague title, he is now at that point. He's proven everything that there is to prove in Europe. He personally feels ready to come over to Portland. And obviously, Portland has been kind of amenable to this the whole time. Again, he went to Portland and had his surgery done there to get the Achilles repaired in 1988. So he and the team have kind of been on the same page this whole time. But coming back now after 95, it's time for him to go over there. He reaches out to Portland and says he's ready. So he comes over. And of course, the first thing is, before signing the contract, he has to get a physical. Portland hasn't really seen the physical since they did the Achilles surgery in 88. After completing the physical, team physicians told Trailblazers GM Bob Whitsitt that Sabonis would 100% qualify for a handicapped parking spot based on the result of his physical. Based on the x-rays that showed the damage to his bones, he has played through stretch fractures, based on the state of his Achilles, based on the state of his knee ligaments. All told, if Arvydas Sabonis wanted to apply for a handicap placard based on the physical and the resulting mobility issues, he would 100% qualify.
Modern day NBA teams would figure out how to market that.
They would find a way. They would find a way. But even in spite of this, they know what they're getting into, but they also know the talent. And the Trailblazers say it's time to bring him over. So Arvydas Sabonis finally signs to play with Portland. For the 95-96 season, immediately steps in, averages 14.5 points and 8.1 boards. He's named first team All-Rookie and finishes the runner-up for the Rookie of the Year. In the first round of the playoffs, the Blazers are matched up against the Jazz. Arvydas Sabonis, going against Karl Malone and that Jazz team, has some shit to prove. Steps his game up in a big way. In the best-of-5 series, he averages 23.6 points and 10.2 boards, significantly outpacing the 14.5 and 8.1 from his season averages. This pushes the Jazz to 5 games, but in that best-of-5, the Jazz do ultimately close it out at home. For the 97-98 season, that's going to be the best that Arvydas has statistically while playing in Portland. Starts all 73 games that he appears in, and while averaging 32 minutes, he has 16 points a game to go with 10 boards, so averaging a double-double. Also pitching in 3 assists a game from that center spot.
Who else is on that team? Brian Grant.
Brian Grant, tremendous friend of the podcast. Yeah, a great Portland team. And I mean, honestly, some very interesting Portland teams that he plays for throughout his era here. Again, that's the most individual success that he has. He's going to be kind of the oddball member of the Jailblazers that everybody remembers. Rasheed Wallace, Damon Stoudemire, Ruben Patterson. Very fun team there, and Arvydas was around for it. A funny note, so obviously this whole time he's playing in Portland. For the 1997 and 1999 seasons, he wins the Euroscar again, despite not playing in Europe both of these years.
They're just like, you're doing so well over there. We're just so proud of you in absentia that we're going to give you an extra trophy.
100%. And I mean, like, and that to me just like is the perfect kind of encapsulation of like how deified Arvydas Sabonis is in European basketball. And like, and getting back to kind of the theme for this week. Over there, Arvydas Sabonis is an absolute god of basketball. And here he's like, did you know Domantas' dad was actually really good? If he never had injuries, who knows, might have been better than Domantas. Like, that's kind of the conversation around Arvydas here. When in reality, he's like this incredible fucking basketball player that, again, if it wasn't for the injuries, who knows? Could have very easily come over and been healthy and asserted himself as one of the great big men in the history of basketball, in the American consciousness at least. After the 2000-2001 season, he's ready to retire from the NBA. His plan is to go back to Europe, but due to all of these accumulated injuries, he is going to sit out the entire 2001-2002 season. And after sitting on it for a while, he decides, you know what? Fuck it. Let me go back to America one more time. Plays for the Trailblazers for 2002-2003. By far his worst statistics. It's the only season he averages less than 10 points at 6.1. His minutes fell to 15.5 a game. Notably shot his best three-point percentage at 50% that year to go with 78.7 from the line. So again, a great shooter, shot 32.8% from 3 for his NBA career at 7'3". Pretty remarkable. But after that 2002-2003 season, he does decide it is time. to hang him up and time to retire from the NBA. He still has more shit to do back over in Europe. And as a romantic, what more could we love than to go back to your hometown?
Oh, beautiful.
You first played for them when they're in the USSR, and now as a free nation in Lithuania. He's going to play for Žalgiris Kaunas again. He's also immediately named team president. So some very strong parallels with Dave Nilsson here in terms of the greater potential that could have been realized if not for injury, immediately being ascended as the highest level person in this sport in your country. Some interesting parallels there with Dave Nilsson. This could have been looked at as just a ceremonial swan song, coming back home. But at the age of 40, Arvydas Sabonis had to let Europe know that he is still their daddy and he is still the greatest player in Europe. At the age of 40 in EuroLeague, he averages 16.7 points to go with 10.7 boards, 2.4 assists, 1.6 blocks, and a steal a game. For this, he is named the EuroLeague MVP. Also led the league in PIR, which is their performance index rating. It's kind of like their PER. It's a little different. I don't really care. Arvydas Sabonis is amazing. He won MVP at the age of 40 with no knees and no Achilles, no ankles, no ligaments. He won EuroLeague MVP.
And this one was not one of his participation trophies.
No, exactly. Yeah, the math checks out, the eye test checks out, everything checks out. He leads them to the EuroLeague elimination, which they just call the top 16. They do not win EuroLeague this year, but in spite of this, he's still named EuroLeague top 16, aka playoffs MVP. And at this point, he thinks it's time to retire. So he does finally walk away from the game. Some other fun footnotes to acknowledge about Arvydas. He was on the cover of the 2001 edition of NBA Live in Lithuania. So specifically got the Lithuanian cover. Everybody knows his son, Domantas. He also has a daughter, Alshrin, and he has two other sons, Zigomantas and Tautvydas.
Zigomantas is phenomenal.
Zigomantas and Tautvydas. So sorry if you're listening, because I probably just butchered the fuck out of your name. Both play in Europe. Tautvydas has also appeared on the Lithuanian national team alongside Domantas. Zigomantas has not made it there quite yet, but obviously still very much a basketball family. They currently live in Spain, in Malaga. But I think the biggest thing that I could say to pay tribute to Arvydas is what Clyde Drexler said. Obviously, Clyde Drexler, one of his teammates for those early years in Portland, in reflecting and saying if they've been able to add Arvydas to those early 90s teams, maybe in particular the 92 team that went to the finals against the Chicago Bulls, alongside Drexler, Terry Porter, Buck Williams, Steve Johnson, Kevin Duckworth, and Cliff Robinson. Clyde said the Blazers would have had, quote, 4, 5, or 6 titles, guaranteed. He was that good. He could pass, shoot three-pointers, had a great post game, and dominated the paint. Truly, I think if you're a basketball sicko like I am, one of the greatest what-ifs in basketball history is what would have happened if Arvydas Sabonis stayed healthy and spent his prime in the NBA. I think that the entire history of the game would be different because we're looking at the late 80s when you still have the Celtics and the Lakers going back and forth. Maybe the Lakers don't make it to a few of those titles. Did the bad boy Pistons ever win a championship? Bill Laimbeer against Arvydas Sabonis. Good fucking luck. I like Bill Laimbeer. Bill Laimbeer would have been stuffed into a fucking trash can by Arvydas Sabonis.
It would be an all-time modern-day white guy matchup.
Well, just the idea that Bill Laimbeer was out on the court as this enforcer and he's this big, strong, tough guy. Bill Laimbeer would have been dwarfed by Arvydas Sabonis. If he tried to hard foul Arvydas Sabonis, he would have injured himself. Would have stood absolutely zero chance. And then truly, into Jordan's run. Does Jordan win the 92 finals against Portland if Arvydas Sabonis is waiting for him in the paint there? 91 Lakers, would they have even made it there? Does Hakeem Olajuwon ever win a championship if he has to go through Arvydas Sabonis? All of these are fascinating what-if questions. It's disappointing that we never got to get the answer to them, but I am hoping that we are going to get the answer to the question, is Arvydas Sabonis a guy? I say yes.
He is a guy without a question. No doubt whatsoever that he is.
Okay, I'm glad you both have prefaced that because the people on this tribunal are sickos when it comes to sports. I hear Arvydas Sabonis, and I think he's one of the best basketball players of all time. Because I very highly value the EuroLeagues based on the many EuroLeague people I have talked about on this podcast. But if the two of you set down the parameter that he is a guy that takes away the biggest complaint that I had based on my own opinion of Arvydas Sabonis' career.
All three of these, everyone that we discuss for the most part is a guy with few exceptions. It's about who is the best of them. Like, it would be easy if it was just questioning whether or not they are. We set ourselves to a higher standard, and that is why we are cursed to make these decisions about these guys. And we have a decision to make between these three. Of the two that you have brought here, both are excellent without even getting to David. I gotta say with Straka, I don't know when you first introduced that he was 5'9", but once I realized that this whole time we were talking about a 5'9" little guy, I'm sorry, I just love a little guy.
69 inches tall, let it be said.
69 inches tall, fuck yes, we love that. And as I said, I will have a soft spot for anyone that is an avatar of a team that is important to UX. For Arvydas, no doubt that he has not even like a national presence. Because I admit I kept perhaps my scope too small. I guess I could argue that Australia is a continent in addition to being a country, but Sabonis certainly captures that continental spirit. I also really love Dave Nilsson. I'm still leaning Dave Nilsson at this point for one primary reason, but I don't want to take up all the oxygen here initially.
I mean, Xavier, you got a hawk for your guy.
Well, I love Marty Straka because he was such a big part of the first Rangers team that I fell in love with, but also the fact that the best part of his career was definitely for both the Czech national team and in the Czech league. And the fact that at the age of 40, after having come back to his hometown, keeping his hometown team afloat financially with his own money, he scores a double overtime Game 7 winner to give them their first and only ever title. I love the romanticism of that, but I will say that I also am a big fan of Dave Nilsson.
We've heard stuff in favor of a little bit of Nilsson and a little bit of Straka. What's a last push for Sabonis over what you already have?
Well, I think one thing that we've talked about a ton on this podcast is the less famous family member. And here we have the interesting Schrodinger's family member, where depending on where you are in the world, he is either the more famous or less famous as related to Domantas. In America, certainly the less famous. But I think if you go over to Lithuania, I think it wouldn't be, hey, Domantas' dad was really good for us in the 90s. It would be, hey, Arvydas' kid's doing pretty good over there.
Sabonis is a very, quantum guy in that way, which is a very interesting angle to look at it. Like, Xavier, you're not totally out of line to, bring up that question. I'll still absolutely say that he is a guy, but it's fascinating that he is one of the best Soviet players of all time. Here is my one question. I don't know this, and you might not know this either. Is he, considered the greatest Soviet player?
Greatest Soviet player? I believe they would say that.
Okay.
He's both the greatest Soviet and the greatest Lithuanian.
And I mean, truly, my other pitch would be to what the prompt is. Only a guy in America. We're talking about a person who is arguably the GOAT in Europe, and yet is only a guy in America.
And I think in all of those, we could raise the question, should Dave Nilsson be considered a guy? If we go to Australia and talk to someone about baseball, he's the biggest thing in the world. It's here's a question. Do we care about the prominence of the sport? Because I will concede, we're talking about a fundamentally bigger audience for Sabonis just due to playing basketball in Europe versus Nilsson playing baseball in Australia. And I mean, to that same credit, Straka hockey in Czechoslovakia, definitely bigger than baseball in Australia. So if that's something that we care about, that could be one way to narrow this down. My only rebuttal to that, again, because I love Dave Nilsson after spending a week with him, is he is Australian baseball.
This is a tough one.
And so I guess based on that point, that's kind of where I would say to eliminate Straka. I'm sorry, Xavier, because Straka is not the face of hockey in the Czech Republic, right? That's very clearly Jaromir Jagr.
Jaromir Jagr, but Jaromir Jagr is too good. He is definitely too good to be a guy.
Of course. But now
Straka is a legend to his hometown. he's a big deal in the Czech Republic, is what it feels like. Like, he's not the guy in the Czech Republic. He is still like a star.
Yes. But I think it's fine to remove him when we're talking about guys who are the literal guy of their own countries that we are talking about with Nilsson and Sabonis. But with everything I've said previously, I'm still leaning Nilsson just because I think he's more of a guy than Sabonis is, just in my own opinion. I know we've made this primer, but I consider Sabonis one of the best ever. I had never heard of Dave Nilsson before, and I was very intrigued to learn about him and what he's done for Australian baseball.
He was in our lives just like a week ago. He was managing against Japan in like one of the closest 7-1 blowouts you've ever seen.
I've made my pitches. I think it's absolutely fair that Xavier gets a tie-breaking vote because I would still stick with Arvydas, but I cede the point. I'm sure Arvydas will get in at a later date, but for now...
I think that's safe to say.
But with that being the case, I believe with no further ado, it's time for us to welcome in to our illustrious hall a guy that has done some great work down under. And I'm not just talking about when he's down under in the catching position. I'm also talking when he's in his home country, helping to lead the development, helping to save in many ways the sport of baseball in Australia, able to guide his country, nay, his entire continent, to glory on more occasions than one, and still representing as best as he can on the international stage. But now, not only a member of the Milwaukee Brewers Wall of Honor, but also a member of our Hall of Guy, Dave Nilsson. Welcome to the Hall of Guy.
Okay, so I was going to hold off on talking about the Milwaukee Brewers Wall of Honor, but I need to touch on it for just a second now that you've brought it up. Because here's the thing. You just have to hit benchmarks to get in. Like, there's not a voting. You just have to get 2,000 plate appearances or 1,000 innings pitched or 250 games pitched, or you can get an MVP, a Cy Young, a Rookie of the Year, or a Reliever of the Year. That's like, if you do any of those as a player at any point for the Milwaukee Brewers, you're just automatically in the Wall of Honor, no matter what. You can also manage a pennant winner, have a statue at the field, get a Hall of Fame induction, be a broadcaster for at least 20 years, a GM for at least 10 years. The GM, though, does have to make minimum one postseason.
I like that better than everything else because it takes all the guesswork out of it, all the politicking out of it. It's just, we realize we're the Brewers. If you do this, you'll be honored here.
Make it simple. I love it.
Well, we've had beer drinkers, we've had brewers, we've had ballers. It's been a phenomenal time, and we appreciate you all for joining us during that time. If you just can't get enough, guys, you can remember to check out the Twitter every day for Guy of the Day. You can find all of our information at bit.ly/rememberthatguy, all lowercase, all one word. Thank you so much to my partners in crime and to our musical director, Don Ham, for playing us in here at the start. We'll be back next week. Hey, I've won my 2 here at the start of the season, so get ready for an 0-for-7 stretch, baby. But until that losing streak starts, I've been James.
I've been the very special guest, Xavier.
And I'm Diaz. And I got to tell you, James would win this discussion every week if it was decided by voter fatigue-proof robots instead of narrative-seeking guys. Should have batted him 9th to really send home the point.
Well, no, I mean, now Trey Turner's turned that into a place of value. Place of honor, really.
Second leadoff. Technically, because he bats before the leadoff hitter. So isn't he kind of the first leadoff hitter?
I mean, we're getting back into...
Is it the ultimate...
Is 11 before midnight?
Right, exactly. It's more of an intellectual question at that point.
It's like we can't ask chicken or the egg anymore. It was the egg. Back in the day when we didn't understand genetics, that was an excellent question to ponder on. And then we learned about how evolution works, and it was actually the egg.
Chicken, though. I'm an eye test guy when it comes to chicken versus egg.
We know the egg has a chick in it. Does it also have dog in it?